Hi, I'm Sharon. Thank you for joining me today. Please, if you watch my stories, give me an emoji or a hi there or a comment. It really encourages me. I never thought I would reach story number 12 and even dozen when I decided to write a story or two for you to cheer during this time of some really distressing news. But I certainly hope you've enjoyed them. You know that I write about morticians because that's what I know about. And some are really strange, and probably none more strange than me. So the stories I tell are based on the truth. And of course, I exaggerate because that's me. And for humor's sake. But yes, this story is based on the truth too. Fallon's voice blasted through the intercom. Bessie May, there's a removal at Memorial Cancer Center for you, a Mamie Jackson. Take Mary Lynn. It'll be a good learning experience for her. Bessie May had waited on the Jackson family a few months earlier when their great-grandfather died. The family owned a huge cattle ranch close to Ash Grove. On the way to the cancer center, Bessie May told the story of the funeral for Houston Frank Jackson, the patriarch of the Jackson clan. I first met Mamie in her home several years ago before she entered the nursing home. Honey, they owned more acres than they could say grace over. They were in tall cotton. In fact, Houston invited me to go feral hog hunting. Did you go? Mary Lynn wanted to know. Only once. It was quite an experience. Houston was quite the cowboy, never went anywhere without his 10-gallon hat. We rode on horses all day. Finally, we spotted a feral herd. Did you shoot one? I got one round off, but my horse was skittish, and that was when I was glad that my backside had enough padding. It's as soft as a 2-minute egg, so no damage was done when I landed on it, just my ego. Anyway, years later, when Houston died, I got the call from the nursing home for the removal. However, I had to wait a few days to retrieve his teeth. Why? Mary Lynn asked. Because one of the elderly men in the home became as confused as a goat on AstroTurf and stole everyone's teeth during a crime spree. It took the workers an entire day to find them because he'd stashed them in nooks and crannies all over the home. That poor feller was about as welcome as a porcupine at a nudist colony for a few days after that. Then to top it off, all the false teeth had to be autoclaved, so it took another couple days to sort out which patient owned which set. Isn't that a hoot? Mary Lynn said that must have made the family pretty angry. No, they're too southern to sweat the piddling things, and the man wasn't intentionally trying to be malicious. Life is all about not getting rattled over the small things. After I placed Houston in his casket, his nephews brought in a pint of Jim Beam whiskey they wanted in his pocket. And then they said their uncle never went anywhere without his 10-gallon hat. So, did you place it on a flower stand in front of the casket? No, that's not what they had in mind at all. I cut the Stetson in half per his nephew's orders so he could wear it in the casket. I filled his pockets with a fifth of whiskey, a tin of chewing tobacco, and his spare set of convertible keys. The '74 classic yellow Cadillac that was over 18 feet long that would follow the hearse in the procession. 18 feet long? Yes, ma'am. He always called it his land yacht. It was designed, let's see, how do you say that? For the open road where the front seat was as comfortable as a plush couch with a windshield and steering wheel in front of it. Those were his exact words, or pretty near to them. He sounded like a walking advertisement for a car company. Really, Mary Lynn said. You can hang your hat on it, Bessie May laughed. It's all true. Anyway, he had Texas Longhorn steer horns mounted on his hood. They were actually 74 inches wide. 74 inches, I know. They're more than 6 feet wide. But this is the best part. The horn actually honked, moo. Marilyn broke out in hysterical laughter. Are you serious? Marilyn, if I say a hen dips snuff, you can look under her wing for the can. Every word is true. How many times do I need to tell you? This family is steeped in Southern tradition. They're so country they think a 7-course meal is a possum and a 6-pack. Bessie May pulled in next to the emergency entrance of the hospital and shoved the gurney into the elevator. Hit B for basement, honey. The doors opened to the morgue and Bessie May hollered, Jason! A morgue attendant from the back shouted, Well, goose grease and horse muffins, if it ain't the gorgeous Bessie May Bustleby. You're a sight for sore eyes. Bessie May beamed. Well, bless your thumping little gizzard. How's Earl? Fine as frog's hair split 4 ways. Lord, they're talking gibberish. And here I stand with no interpreter, Marilyn said. Jason Pearl, meet Marilyn Pressman. Marilyn is the boss's daughter. Marilyn laughed and held out her hand. Yeah, but don't hold that against me. Then she turned to Marilyn. Jason was in our college youth group a few years ago. Jason grinned. How's Beauregard? Bessie May chuckled. Last time I saw him, he was shaking like a hound passing a peach pit. Jason leaned forward. Tell me everything, and I don't want you to skip one detail. If you've got coffee in your office, we've got a few minutes to spare. The coffee's always on for you. Come on. He led them into a small office and pulled up an extra chair for Marilyn. All right, now here's your coffee. Tell me about Mr. Crazy as a Loon. Well, that Marilyn did understand and could agree with. Well, you know Beauregard has this long-standing feud with Mr. Henry, the custodian at the funeral home. I do. Mr. Henry's a true gentleman, but Beauregard blames everything on the weather, his raising, or Mr. Henry. Bessie May nodded and continued. About a week and a half ago, Beauregard devised another one of his infamous plans. Oh, no, Jason said, smiling broadly. What did Mr. Doesn't have enough sense to spit downwind do this time? One evening, Beauregard pulled into the mortuary garage after all the employees had left for the evening, including Mr. Henry. Part of this information I gleaned after Beauregard came crying to me about how unfairly he'd been treated over the unfortunate accident. Sounds like Beauregard. Jason leaned in closer. He didn't want to miss a single word. Beauregard got the wire flower cart from the back hall and shoved it to the shed at the back of the parking lot where Mr. Henry stores the used vehicle oil after changing all the vehicles. What do you want that for? Jason wanted to know. Be patient, Marilyn said. It's worth the wait. And then she giggled. Periodically, Henry would call for used vehicle oil to be hauled off, but often not before the black syrupy liquid turned rancid. Beauregard said he removed the lids, smelled each barrel, and chose the rankest. He said he knew Henry wouldn't know what hit him. He'd make Henry regret ever making Beauregard the butt of his own joke when Henry shot him in the hiney with rock salt at the trash cans. I remember, Jason chuckled. Of course, I have to admit that he deserved that. Beauregard heaved the oil pan up on the cart and filled it to the rim with the rancid oil. Those canisters must weigh more than a hog loose in an apple orchard, Jason said. Bessie May ignored Jason's exclamation. Beauregard went to the front office and grabbed the spare key to Henry's workroom. After unlocking the workroom door, he got one of Henry's ladders and balanced the heavy bucket above the door where it waited to fall on the unsuspecting prey. Tell me it's not so, Jason said. If that ain't a fact, Einstein's a possum, Bessie May said. Beauregard told me that he was sure that the next morning Mr. Henry would find trying to stand in the workroom would be harder than a cat trying to cover its poo on a frozen pond. He did say he was pleased with himself as he drove home that night. Tell me Mr. Henry figured out the prank before he was covered with sludge, Jason said. Just wait, Marilyn said as she got up to refill coffee cups. The next morning, the secretary answered the phone. It was Mr. Henry. Problem? Jason asked. Flat tire. Said he had to buy a new one. He wouldn't be in for a couple of hours. Well, Fallon, boss, arrived unannounced because he wanted to have a chat with Beauregard about some incidents involving Beauregard's antics, involving dogs recently. Jason's eyes widened. Bessie May continued, I don't have time right now to fill you in on all those stories, Jason. So Fallon went to see the man most knowledgeable about what went on at the funeral home, Mr. Henry. The workroom door was locked. Fallon has the master key to every door at the funeral home. Jason couldn't contain his delight. When the door opened, the bucket of sludge fell on Fallon's head. Several minutes later, when Fallon could stand and regain his foothold, he stomped up to the back door, leaving sludge footprints on the outdoor carport. He swung open the back door of the mortuary. I have to tell you, Jason, he was as mad as a mule chewing on bumblebees. Beauregard had heard the crash from Mr. Henry's workroom, and his feet could not stop dancing when he heard sloshing up the back hall door. Henry got what he deserved, he mumbled to the secretary. Putrid odor wafted up the hallway. Beauregard motioned for the secretary to come out of her office and the other funeral directors to join him to wait for Mr. Henry's smelly entrance from the back. Oh, no, Jason said. Oh, yes, Marilyn said. His eye just about fell out of his socket when he saw that it was not Mr. Henry, but instead Fallon. Now, his glass eye, as usual, was disinterested. It had roamed the carpet, the wall, well, and the sign to the bathroom. Whenever Beauregard was nervous, it became a vagabond. Oil cemented Fallon's blonde hair to his scalp and drizzled down his eyebrows onto his cheeks, down to his mouth. He tried to wipe his lips with his sleeve, but it just smeared. The stench gushed down his silk-white shirt, and it even bubbled out his buttonholes. His brand-new suit was one saturated, reeking mess. I can't imagine how he could even walk with that stuff. Beauregard stood motionless. Beauregard gulped. I. Jason about fell out of his chair laughing. Fallon boomed to Beauregard, "Into the office now." Beauregard hung his head. "It wasn't me," Beauregard lied. Fallon was madder than a wet setting hen. "I know you did it," he screamed. And Jason, I won't go into details of what Fallon said because the words weren't fitting for man or beast. Suffice it to say, Beauregard's ears took a beating, as well as his paycheck. Beauregard was placed on leave for several days. Fallon ended up wiping down with clean towels from the embalming room as best he could and wearing a clean embalming gown home. He was a sight to see. Cleaning up was going to be a mammoth job, and Henry would need help. So Granger was called in. Mary Lynn and I helped too. By this time, Jason was laughing so hard he was crying. When he could gain some composure, he turned to Mary Lynn. "Sorry about laughing about your father, Mary Lynn." "Don't be silly," Mary Lynn said. "I love my father, but I know he's so tight that he'd squeeze a nickel till the buffalo passes gas. And when I inherit this funeral home, I don't intend to gyp any employees out of money. Besides, a picture's worth 1,000 words. The Armani suit, $3,800. Imported Italian shoes, $1,500. And the picture of my father squirming in an oil-slicked outfit, priceless." Jason looked at her and smiled. "You're going to be one amazing boss, Mary Lynn." She blushed. After a few more minutes of small talk, Bessie May said, "We've come for Mamie Farrell." Jason led the women to a refrigerator cooler at the back of the morgue and pulled out a drawer. "Mrs. Jackson will need a facial reconstruction. Cancer has consumed most of her nose. I packed her prosthetic nose with her belongings, but I don't think it'll fit anymore." "She was a lovely lady, Jason," Bessie May drawled. She'd have been 97 this year. Maybe Mamie's husband went to his heavenly home less than a year ago. They shared the same room at the nursing home. When he died, she really gave up the will to go on. As she pushed the gurney out of the morgue, Bessie May hollered, "Jason, come for Sunday dinner." It didn't take much to convince him. "Mary Lynn, you come too. I'll invite Granger. When I fry chicken, there's enough to feed Thrashers." The dry back gave Bessie May time to fill Mary Lynn in about Jason. "His parents died in a car crash when he was a teen, so he lived with us for a year before he started college. I'm as proud of him as if he were my own son." In the prep room, both women gowned up. Bessie May added some red dye and lanolin to the embalming mix and gave Mary Lynn a quick quiz over the process. "Why red dye?" "To replace the color that the blood provides, and the lanolin is necessary to preserve softness of a 97-year-old body until the service is over." Bessie May grinned. "Well, butter my behind and call me a biscuit. You are paying attention. After embalming, shampooing, and bathing Mrs. Jackson, they covered her with a fresh sheet. We'll wait till morning to restore her facial features. It'll give some time for the fluids to firm her body. Mary Lynn asked, "What's the service schedule?" "Graveside service Monday, visitations restricted here where there's air conditioning, considering the amount of wax I used to rebuild her nose. Beauregard will meet us at Ash Grove Cemetery. Fallon laid down the law to Beauregard to keep the casket closed at the cemetery. Summer heat will melt the wax." "What'd Beauregard say?" He sat there grinning like a possum eating persimmons. "I don't trust Beauregard. He better do what Fallon says, or he'll be chasing the nose and his hiney." "We'll meet Beauregard at the graveside service at noon. The service should run smoothly, even with Beauregard in charge. There's not much that can go wrong. Granger's going. Beauregard's taken a shine to him." Granger and Bessie May walked into the stateroom to close the casket. "Wait a minute, Granger." Bessie May went to the office. "Mamie's daughter brought this quilt in this morning. Mamie always draped it around her at the home. Sweet, huh?" Bessie May started tucking the quilt down the sides of the casket. Bessie May, Marilyn, and Granger were on the road with Mamie Jackson by 10:30. "Both of you get water from the cooler in the hearse frequently. It would be very easy to suffer a sunstroke." Bessie May pulled into the Ash Grove Country Cemetery. Marilyn looked out the window at the angry terrain. She shuddered as she thought back to Bessie May's encounter with the fire ants. "Watch where you step. Rattlesnakes aren't skittish when it comes to humans disturbing their territory. This cemetery's dubbed Under God's Care because man doesn't poke his nose here," Bessie May warned. The pallbearers placed the casket onto the cemetery straps while the Jackson family sheltered in the shadow of a scrub oak. The flowers were arranged in front of a closed casket. Fine sand blew everywhere. Bessie May dusted her hands. Her work was done. As soon as the service was over, they would be back in air conditioning and headed home. A great niece of Mamie Jackson's approached Bessie May. "I know this isn't planned, but great Auntie Mamie looked so beautiful at the funeral home. My Uncle C.T. flew in from out of town, and the family was wondering if he could have a few minutes to view her. We brought pictures, but that's not possible to open the casket due to the amount of wax I used in restoration of her." Beauregard stepped in front of Bessie May. "What Mrs. Bustleby means is that she's sorry it won't be possible to keep the casket open for an extended period of time." The niece hugged Beauregard and said she knew the family would share his unusual kindness with the owner of the funeral home. Beauregard beamed. "Marilyn, open the casket." He walked off to bask in the family's adoration. "That arrogant," Bessie May sputtered. "So do I open it or not?" Marilyn asked. "If Beauregard wants the casket open, he'll have to do it," Bessie May said. Beauregard walked up and grabbed the casket key from Marilyn's hand. "I guess if a man wants something done right, he has to do it himself." Then he announced, "If anyone else wants to view Mrs. Jackson, please step up. And feel free to take as much time as you need." Standing at the head of the casket, he could hear family members comment about the beautiful job he did preparing Mamie. Looking at the mourners, he said, "I took as much care in preparing her as I would for my own precious grandmother." Marilyn was incensed. He didn't do any of it. You did. Typical for Beauregard. Bessie May mopped sweat off her forehead and turned to Beauregard. The wax will melt. Beauregard ignored Bessie May and mustered a sympathetic smile for the family. Mamie's nose slowly began to sink. Bessie May glared at Beauregard and whispered, Beauregard, you have to close the casket now. The nose is... Back off, woman. You're not in charge. I am. The preacher read the obituary. The nose was a little flatter, and it began to creep down her cheek. Family members' eyes were focused on the preacher, while Bessie May's eyes were glued to the drifting nose. Bessie May walked to the preacher and whispered, Say amen, preacher, you're done, and then yanked on his coat. At that point, he looked down and realized the situation. Mamie's nose was headed south. Everyone, close your eyes for prayer. Bessie May nodded at Granger to close the casket. Then she jerked Beauregard by the sleeve. Unlock this casket, and I'll make sure you squat on your spurs. Is that clear? Yes, ma'am. Beauregard stepped back. He knew when he should back away from Bessie May. He was right. And yes, Beauregard did open the casket. And yes, the wax nose was heading south. I hope you had a laugh or two today. Have a blessed day.